Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the Canes for the touchdown. Howe showing the toughness for 6. Orioles down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Goes to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart. Now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown. They are going to play for the left-handed. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading in the far side. Theo at the 35. Theo, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Theo, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome in to another edition of the Heel Tough Vlog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, with you guys as always. And tonight, 5 days away from the start of Carolina's season, it's time to get you one of our favorite podcast editions that we do all season long. It's when we go through our breakout players and our bold predictions for this upcoming season. So me and Josh will have 5 breakout players each for you. We'll also have 5 bold predictions each for you here on this edition of the podcast. We want to hear from you guys. Head over into the comments section. Give us your breakout players for this upcoming season, your bold predictions for this upcoming season, and we'll get to those at the end of the show to wrap it all up. But we did want to give you guys some updates on what's going on around Carolina as they head into the season opener, or really as they get ready to travel overseas to Ireland to get ready for this game against TCU. Now, the team won't be traveling until Wednesday, so I would imagine that they are, they practiced earlier today. Would imagine that they maybe do some sort of walkthrough or something tomorrow, or maybe even a full day of practice tomorrow before they end up getting on the jet on Wednesday night to fly over into Thursday morning. That's when they will arrive. And then, of course, they will begin preparations there for the game that is on Saturday afternoon at noon on ESPN. And some of the latest storylines that are going on around Carolina. We've heard from the head coach here twice within the last handful of days. So there are some takeaways from that. But there has been some news that has come out from both Inside Carolina and Tar Heel 24/7 that Jordan Washington and Jackson Warren, the 2 tight ends that Carolina got in the transfer portal, or 2 of the tight ends that Carolina got in the transfer portal this offseason, there is an expectation that those guys are not going to be ready for the start of the season. They will not be available for the game against TCU. There have been some rumors over the last handful of weeks, but Inside Carolina confirmed that over the weekend that looks like that is going to be the case when Carolina travels over to Dublin. So 2 guys that I think there were, some pretty sizable expectations for, especially Jackson Warren. I felt like a lot of people, based on what they saw from him in the first game of last season against Washington, had some high expectations for him as a receiver. Jordan Washington, a guy that at 264 pounds, you probably looked at and thought was going to be someone that could be a real factor as a blocker for the Tar Heels at tight end. How concerned are you about these injuries heading into the opener? I think looking at the position itself, probably one of the best positions that it could happen at, but you still hate to see this, especially for Warren, who now is dealing with an injury for the third straight season.
Yeah, I think it takes some wind out of your sails as we get ready for this opener, just because I think this tight end room is going to be real key to just how explosive, how efficient, how dynamic this offense can be. And we'll talk about them more as we get into some of our breakout players. But I in my head, I see a lot of 12, 13 personnel packages that Carolina is going to utilize this year to maximize that tight end room. And maybe now you can't necessarily do as much of that in this game against TCU. And so maybe, it hurts in that regard just because we're ready for the season. We have high expectations for this room altogether. And we come out of the gate and know that room is going to be somewhat compromised. But I still think these are going to be two guys, and assuming Carolina gets them healthy, they get them on the field sooner rather than later. We'll be talking about both these guys in a big way, in a positive way, because I think they're going to impact winning for Carolina. I was hopeful it would be a start in this game in week 0 against TCU. That's more than likely not going to be the case, but the quicker we can just get these guys healthy, get these guys on the field, it's good. But as you mentioned, I think you can expect Jelani Thurman to maybe really break out in a big way on Saturday. But that room top to bottom is deep, it's talented, it's versatile. It could probably withstand these two injuries, and that's what they'll have to do as they go into this opener against TCU on Saturday.
Yeah, and look, I wrote about another guy that I think is going to be heavily involved when I was writing about the true freshman. I think what it does is it opens the door for Carson Snead to be very effective for Carolina right out of the gate, or at least see some playing time right out of the gate. Now, what it ends up looking like, I think, is going to be very important for Carolina to determine how much they're going to use 12 personnel, if they're going to at times use 13 personnel. The good news is that you still have guys that have played at the college level in that room. In Shamar Easter, that could be a guy that Carolina uses if they want to throw the football a little bit in 13 personnel. So you could still use that along with Jelani Thurman. And then, of course, you've got the true freshman in Carson Snead. But I do think you're still probably going to see a decent amount of 12 personnel, because you go back to the first practice that Carolina had of fall camp, and we noted that what the reports were saying was that Carson Snead was the guy that was taking first-team reps alongside of Jelani Thurman. So, look, I don't know when Jackson Warren sustained this injury. I know that Jordan Washington hasn't been out there the entire time here during fall camp. So that would point to the fact that he got injured back in the summer. May have been a similar fate for Jackson Warren. They've had the time to get Carson Snead up to speed on where he needs to be. I feel like receiving wise is probably the area that you're most worried about. I mean, this is a guy that was a former offensive lineman. He played offensive line early in his high school career, then eventually converts to tight end for his final 2 years of eligibility at the high school level. And so, yeah, this is going to be someone that I think blocking wise, I'm not going to be overly concerned about him. I think he's going to be fine in that area. I think you wonder just how effective he can be as a receiver. So I think Carolina is going to be fine there. But yeah, you would love to be full strength at that position. I think what you're hoping is that you're going to be able to get these guys back at some point. Some of the rumors around Jackson Warren's injury is that it could be long term. That's certainly not what you want to see, and hopefully that doesn't end up being the case. But it'll be interesting to monitor that tight end room in the first game of the season. You could see a lot of 11 personnel for Carolina where they rely on 3 receiver sets, sometimes even 4 wide receiver sets for them to try to move the football. So that'll be something we'll certainly watch over the next couple of days and into Saturday. We'll also, in terms of talking and what we've heard from the head coach of the Tar Heels, he's talked about Billy Edwards Jr. And he explained on Thursday of last week why he was the guy that Carolina went with. And it was pretty simply that he was more consistent and has more experience, and that showed through in practice. I think that's pretty much what we thought was going to be the reason behind this, was that really the consistency more than anything. I think the experience certainly matters for a game like this because we've talked about it. It's not going to be an easy game against a TCU team that was in others receiving votes. I think if you measured it out based off of the AP poll, they would be the 30th ranked team in the country to start the season. So you would like to have a guy that's got a little bit of experience, that knows how to move the football up and down the field, but you are going to get a guy that doesn't bring nearly the explosiveness that Carolina would have had with a guy like Miles O'Neal because of his arm strength, with a guy like Travis Burgess, if he had been fully healthy the entire offseason with his arm strength. What you do get, though, is a guy that is more consistent, that isn't going to make nearly as many mistakes as those guys might make in the first game of the season. And so that's why it appears that they're rolling with Billy Edwards Jr., and they pretty much confirmed that to us with what Bill Belichick said on Thursday.
Yeah, that message has kind of been the same message we've delivered all offseason long when talking about the quarterback room. And we're both bigger believers in what Miles O'Neal can be. We're really high on the upside of what Travis Burgess can be as the future maybe of Carolina football at the quarterback spot. But if you look at this game as a standalone game, and considering the fact that you got a bye week when you come back, you don't play in week one of the season, and then you've got, an FCS opponent, it kind of is a standalone game. Like, this is a game where you can kind of evaluate differently than what you'll maybe evaluate in your home opener. I do think Billy Edwards Jr. gives them the best chance to win on Saturday. And that's the goal. That's you're not flying on that long flight to go over there and not to try to win. I don't think that he is the long-term answer, and I don't think he'll be Carolina's quarterback post the middle of the season, but we want to win. I want to win this game on Saturday as much as I want to win any game that we'll play all year long, because that's the most important game so far. I understand why he's Carolina's starting quarterback, and hopefully he plays at a level high enough that gives Carolina, one, a chance to win, a chance to be competitive, but two, also to really back up this decision and not have us questioning early on in the game this coaching staff's ability or inability to identify talent.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we've talked about a lot with the TCU opener is the reason why it's so important is that when you look at the lack of success that teams have had that return from this game with a loss, it feels like you've got to get off to a good start. Now, I don't necessarily think that it could kill Carolina's season completely. I mean, is it possible? Yes, it is more than possible that actually ends up happening. But I do think that it's important just to, even if you don't win the game, at least be more competitive than you were last year. Don't come back to the United States off of that loss and come back feeling like we're in the same place that we were at the beginning of last season, because that was a really bad feeling. And, last year you had 2 layups to sort of get yourself right before you took on Central Florida. Now you didn't, but you had 2 layups in Charlotte, who might have been the worst team in the FBS last season, and Richmond, an FCS opponent. This year, you've only got 1. You've got that East Tennessee State game, and then guess what? The next week, you're on the road at Clemson. So you jump right into the deep end. You do get another bye week after that, but then that's right. The next home game, the first home game that you play against a power conference opponent, is Notre Dame. And so I think it's important that Carolina go out there and get off to a good start. And like we said, when we talked about this right after they made the decision, the floor for Billy Edwards Jr. is a little bit higher. You feel like you're not going to get killed with Billy Edwards Jr., where, yes, there is a possibility that you go out there with Miles O'Neal. he puts it all together and puts together a strong performance, and maybe you find a way to win that game. But there's also the possibility that he turns the ball over 3 times, and all of a sudden Carolina gets blown out in that game, and we're back to feeling like we're in the same spot that you were a year ago. There's no excitement heading into that home opener, and the stadium is empty in the first 2 games of the regular season at home. That's what you're trying to avoid, it feels like, if you're Carolina. And I do think that Billy Edwards Jr., even though he isn't perfect, I think he does at least give you a chance to win that season opener. And that's something that, Carolina hopefully feels in that locker room as they head over there to Dublin. Some of the other notes to update you on: Bill Belichick said the team is exploring the possibility of guys that are in NFL training camps, but there are a number of factors, quote, a number of factors involved that we'd have to work through. At this point, I know that some of those guys are available out there. Carolina's starting the season this weekend. They're traveling on Wednesday. They don't have any of those guys currently on the roster that were cleared in the state of Louisiana. I don't know about you. I mean, we can make this pretty quick. I'm good on bringing those guys in. I think you've got your team that you're rolling with this season. You hope to eventually get Reese Verhoff back if you can get that ruling that was laid down late last week. If you can get that overturned again and get him eligible again sometime later on in the season, you would certainly welcome him back if things aren't going great in the kicking game. But as for the guys that come out of the state of Louisiana that have an extra year of eligibility, I think I'm good on that front.
Yeah, so I'll state it like this. Do I think these guys should even have an avenue to come back and play college football? Hell no. At some point, when you're a pro, you're a pro. I don't care what kind of contract it is that you sign at the professional level. You are a professional athlete. There should not be some way for you to come back and play college sports. I know there's a loophole when guys that do the baseball thing and then they go back and play college football, i.e. what Brandon Weeden did, playing for the Yankees, and then came back to college football, playing at Oklahoma State. This stuff is different where you have guys that are in training camps. You have guys that have played in preseason games. They played against NFL competition that are returning back to the collegiate level. So no, I don't think those guys should be allowed back. And I am good on not wanting to add those guys to my roster, to our program. With that being said, I understand why Bill Belichick is going to make that statement, because depending on what type of dudes are deemed eligible, if there's a player that's interested and wanting to play for North Carolina, that is a clear upgrade over certain guys on your roster. If they're somehow deemed eligible to come play for you, I would understand you welcoming him into your program. So this is where, again, we need leadership. We need guidance. I'm as pro player as you can possibly find in the year of our Lord 2026. But at some point, there's got to be some rules and some regulations to this crap. And so I don't want to see it. I'm not going to encourage it. I understand, though, why Carolina is keeping an open mind about it, because Bill Belichick's job is to put the best and most competitive football roster on the field 12 Saturdays. If that means adding one of these fifth-year dudes that's in an NFL camp, then I understand that's what he has to do. I don't think it's going to come to that, but I do understand why he made that statement earlier this afternoon.
Well, yeah, I mean, you would have to agree with that statement, because he's got to show you that he's doing everything to put the best roster out there. And just by saying that, hey, we're looking into this, that shows you that, hey, this is a guy that's taking all the options that are available to him. At the same time, I mean, look, I'm 100% with you. At some point, when you sign an NFL contract, and it's the same thing in the NBA, when it comes to baseball, when it comes to hockey, those are just different sports, man, where you're in the minor leagues. You see guys that eventually go back to college after being drafted. The thing is that when you look at those, and I don't know for sure about the contracts that they sign in baseball. Maybe that sport it is. But I know in hockey, these guys do not sign like NHL entry-level contracts and then go back to the college ranks. It doesn't happen. Those are guys that are in that sign minor league contracts that can eventually go back to college. And so I think that would make more sense. I mean, yeah, if you want to have UFL players that end up going back to college, even that I still think is a little weird because that's just not how college football has been done for years. And we sort of got used to that. I think that's perfectly fine. When it comes to the NFL rosters, man, if you're in an NFL training camp and you're pushing to make an NFL roster, it should not be acceptable for you to basically tell that team, please release me. I'm not going to give you my all on purpose so that you can release me and I can go back to the college ranks and make more money. So, I mean, yeah, I'm good on that front. I don't think Carolina should be looking to bring back any of these guys. I know that there might be like the avenue that would probably exist is if some guys that were on last year's roster end up getting cut from their teams in training camp and they end up wanting to come back. That would be the only way it would make sense. Bringing in somebody that's from an outside program, having to, bring them in and learn a completely new system and everything like that in time to be ready to play games. I would guess you're not going to be available for the first game of the season. So you'd be available for the game against East Tennessee State. That doesn't really make any sense to me at all. You've got your starters, you got your group that you're rolling with. I think you should be perfectly fine with that group that you have. And so I don't think anything's really going to come of this. As I said, the only guy that you're now looking at is Reese Verhoff, who is ineligible after the ruling that came down the other day from the 10th Circuit that granted the NCAA their stay and basically puts a halt on all those guys being eligible. It's a lot more impactful, it feels like, on the basketball side of things. That's the same ruling that made Seth Trimble ineligible. That makes Reese Verhoff ineligible. He does have the avenue of going to another state, getting a ruling there and being ruled eligible for some point of this season, but it doesn't look like he is going to be making the trip over to Dublin at the start of the season. Couple other notes before we turn to our breakout players and our bold predictions for the season. Still no update on Steve Belichick and his status. Not the most shocking thing. I know some people are a little angry about the fact that we haven't received anything. Guys, this is a medical issue. It really isn't something that they're probably going to give a lot of updates on unless they have the specifics of it. And even with Bill being his dad, that's probably personal information that most people would keep close to the vest. A guy like Bill Belichick definitely going to keep it close to the vest. So as of right now, he was asked about what the plan was for play calling again today. Didn't really offer much, but he has offered in the last few times that he spoke prior to today that him and Bob Diaco are going to be the guys that will be handling the play calls, it looks like, in Dublin and for the foreseeable future. Makes sense. Bill Belichick being a guy that's a defensive mind, that shouldn't be shocking that he wants to have at least some hand in what goes on the defensive side of the football. And then Bob Diaco being a former defensive coordinator that has called plays plenty of times during his career is also going to factor in knowing the college game a little bit more than Bill Belichick does. So that'll certainly be interesting, something to watch, and maybe has you a little bit hesitant about how good you feel about this defense going into that first game. The captains were officially named earlier today: Milcart Albujaude, Caleb Cost, Benjamin Hall, Isaiah Johnson, Christo Kelly, Derek McDonald, and Jordan Shipp, all named captains. no surprise there. Just sort of tells you where certain guys are at. Derek McDonald, a guy who we felt was battling for his starting job at one time, now seen as a team captain, shows you that he has taken on a big leadership role for this squad. Benjamin Hall, a guy that we were wondering where he would land in the pecking order at running back. Seems like he's atop the depth chart there, looked at as a leader on this team. One guy a little shocked that I didn't see here was Leroy Jackson, but they do end up going with Isaiah Johnson, which I think is very important as well to see him stepping up as a leader in that room. Also, Milkart Abujade also landing some more recognition late last week. The Chuck Ben-Narek Award put him on their watch list, and the Senior Bowl named him to their top 300 players coming into the season. All right, let's move on to our breakout players for this upcoming season. Again, if you guys are just joining us, make sure you put your breakout players in the comments section. We'll read some of those at the end of the episode. But yeah, we've got 5 guys each. There will be some overlapping here because there are some guys that we both feel pretty confident about. But I'll let you start. Who do you have as your first breakout player for this upcoming season, and why?
Yeah, we go to the offensive side of the football. We go to that running back room, and it's been Benjamin Hall. He's the first player that I listed on when we wrote the article. We filled out the podcast for tonight. You know, I put it in the article like this. Safe to say last year did not go the way that he envisioned, the way that we envisioned it was going to go. And you got to credit him. I think he really bought in to what Belichick wanted him to do with his physique. I think he's a much more explosive runner. I think he's got a little bit more physicality in his run game. And he's emerged as Carolina's quote-unquote starting running back going into the year. Devon June's still going to be heavily featured, but I think we're going to get the form of the guy that we thought we were probably going to get last year, and just buying into, hey, this is a former Michigan running back recruit. You know what type of running backs that program, you know, is able to first off recruit to their program, develop to their program. I think he's quicker, a little bit leaner, but still being able to finish off runs. And I think he's really poised to make a name for himself. I didn't list him as a 1,000-yard rusher. That's mainly because of how much I think Devon June is going to factor into this run game. But I think you're talking about a guy that will lead Carolina in rushing attempts, rushing yards, and I could see him putting up a type of season north of 800 yards on the ground, north of 8 touchdowns, and being the focal point of an offense that I do think wants to be run-oriented, at least early on here in the early part of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is shocking, but I listed him on my list too. I'm buying in. And I think you could probably tell that with how I talked about him after the first practice that Carolina had in the fall, but mainly that second practice. And especially once you saw him up there on the stand talking, you knew he was going to be a leader for Carolina. But I'm excited by what I'm hearing about Benjamin Hall, that, you know, he's a guy that is going to still be the same type of runner that he was a year ago, is going to lower the shoulder, is going to run through guys. And you saw the flashes against California. You saw it a couple of other times throughout the year. Now I think you're going to get the consistency. It's his second year with Carolina. I think that's going to serve him well. It's allowed him to grow. It's allowed him to understand more of what they're going to expect out of him, what Bill Belichick is expecting out of him. And more importantly, I think he has got a coach now in Bobby Petrino that is going to be able to utilize him a little bit better. The other thing that's really going to help him is that you've got an offensive line that I think is going to be better this year. And maybe I'm going to be proven wrong on this. Maybe I'm just buying into some of the hype around some of the strides that some of these guys have taken, according to those that have been out there at practice, according to some of the sources that are inside the program talking to Inside Carolina, to Tar Heel 24/7. the offensive line's going to be better than it was a year ago. That's a pretty low bar, but I feel pretty good about that. And so if they're able to open up running lanes for him, I think you're going to see a much more explosive player. I think there could have been some explosion there last year, but with some of the blocking issues that Carolina had, you just never really got to see it. And I think you're going to see a much more confident running back this year. I don't know if the confidence was ever there last year for Benjamin Hall. Even after that game against Cal, you were rotating with Damon June, you were rotating with Davian Goss, who you could just never figure out what exactly his role is. Now Goss is gone. You're ahead of Damon June on the depth chart, according to a lot of those around the program, and according to the fact that you've been taking the first team reps with the team in the portions of practice that have been observable by the media. And so I think he's going to be a guy that breaks out this season. I could see him being a guy that runs for 700-800 yards. I don't know if he's necessarily 1,000-yard back. I don't know if Carolina has that guy on this year's roster. I don't know if any of the guys in that room are going to receive enough carries to be able to do that. But I do think I'm with you. He is going to be the guy that receives the most carries for Carolina. I think he's going to be the guy that has the most rushing yards for Carolina. Damon June might edge him out when it comes to touchdowns, especially as a red zone threat, a bigger back in there. I think that could be where Damon June shines. But I do think that Benjamin Hall is going to be a very key piece for what Carolina does this year, and he'll probably become a fan favorite as the year goes along. All right, second, again, this is one where we're going to have some similar guys here. You decided to sort of cheat a little bit with this one because you didn't pick one player, but you felt pretty passionate about one room in its entirety.
It's not cheating because I think they're all three gonna break out in their own way. And I wrote down the tight end room with the primary focus on the three transfers that they brought in to revamp the room: Jelani Thurman from Ohio State, Jackson Warren, Colorado State, Jordan Washington from Texas. They're all unique in their ability to impact winning football. And I think there'll be some days that we're coming on here and we're recapping games that Carolina wins, Carolina losses, or Carolina loses, but we're talking about something that we liked. And I might be pointing out one of these tight ends, and someone will go look at the box score and see he only had one catch for 3 yards. What the hell are you talking about? But it's the impact they made in the run game as a blocker, picking up that key block in pass protection, whatever it is. On top of the fact that I do think when they're healthy, I think you're going to see a lot of 13 personnel. I think you're going to see Bobby Petrino want to get the ball in their hands. One, because I think when you look at your quarterback with Billy Edwards Jr., I think he wants to get the ball out quick, decisive. I think it'll be a lot of short stuff. A lot of times that means you're going to funnel the ball to your tight ends. I think you're going to see a lot of tight end screens involved. And so I think they're all three poised to impact the game in a way that we will feel their impact whenever they're all three on the field on a week in, week out basis. If you want me to highlight the one the most, it was going to be your guy, which is Jelani Thurman. I do think he's the guy that could, lead that room in terms of reception yards, touchdowns, so on and so forth. Regardless, this is as optimistic I've been about this room and this room's potential being maximized in quite some time. It won't start this week because of the injuries, but I do think if this offense is an offense that gives Carolina a chance week in, week out to be competitive and compete to make a bowl game, this tight end room is going to be a big reason why. So I think that room collectively set to break out here in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that sucks is it depends on how long these injuries are. I would say don't sleep on Carson Snead either because of how much they've used him in fall practice. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be ready right out of the gate. Now, is he going to be a guy that's going to put up huge numbers right out of the gate? There might be some moments that he struggles out of the gate. Both, I like him as a blocker, but there could be moments where he isn't exactly great as a run blocker. There could be moments where he isn't exactly getting open in the passing game. That's okay. It's going to be a work in progress. Those guys, yes, I think there was so much excitement around that room coming into fall practice based off of what they had done back in the spring. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense why you decided to go in that direction. We just got to figure out, how long is Jordan Washington out? How long is Jackson Warren out? Again, that one, it seems like Washington's is more of a short-term injury, and he should be back sooner rather than later. Warren, there feels to be more concern about just how long he's going to be out, which isn't great considering his injury history. You just hope that it's not something serious and that this is just not that this is not going to be just another lost year for him. But I think the guy that you look at, and the guy that I wrote down as my breakout player out of that tight end room, I think is Jelani Thurman. I really do like him a lot. I look at him and I see a guy that at Ohio State, I feel like he just didn't really get the opportunities more than he wasn't a good receiver. It didn't feel like there were a lot of chances for him when he was at Ohio State. And to be fair, when you've got, someone like Max Clare, who was there for the last few years with him, it's going to be hard not to play a guy that ends up getting drafted to the NFL over a guy like Jelani Thurman, who might not be nearly as good of a receiver, merely as good of a blocker as Max Clare was. My thing is that I feel like this is very similar to the Penn State guys, very similar to Jalen Harvey, who you have on your list. I think when you look at it, it's more about he's going to get an opportunity here. To me, there's a reason why he landed on the Mackey Award watch list. If people didn't think that highly of him, then he would be a guy that wouldn't have landed on that watch list. He would have just gone into the season as pretty much a nondescript tight end. There's some expectations for him. And when you hear some of the reviews, you hear some sources around the program that say he might be the best catcher of the football that Carolina that Carolina has this year. I think that's pretty encouraging, because when you have a guy like Jordan Shipp that can catch just about anything that's thrown his way, I mean, going back to last year, I don't remember a single drop from Jordan Shipp, a moment that I was left with my hands on my head saying, how do you drop that? Jordan Shipp's extremely reliable. From what we've heard, Trek Kekauna, who's a guy that I'll talk about a little bit coming up here a little bit later on, he's another guy that people have said is pretty reliable for Carolina. But the most reliable guy they're talking about is Jelani Thurman. I think, especially early in the year, with Billy Edwards Jr. starting at quarterback, at least for the first game of the season. But I think he's going to put up at least a good enough performance in that opener where he's going to play a few more games to start the season. I do think that Jelani Thurman is going to be heavily involved. He's going to be used as a safety valve. We know how much Billy Edwards likes the short passing game, the intermediate passing game. I think that's where Jelani Thurman is going to shine. He could be a guy that ends up moving the sticks for Carolina. And oh, by the way, pretty good blocker if you go back and look at his numbers in his time at Ohio State. Like, really good. A guy that could allow Carolina to be able to run the ball much more effectively than they were able to last year with some of the tight end issues that they had a year ago. I'm expecting a pretty big year from him. I'm not going to say that we're not expecting Eric Ebron numbers out of Jelani Thurman. I think, especially as the year goes along, and if they turn to a stronger armed quarterback at some point, which I do think is going to end up happening, then he probably won't be relied on nearly as much. But I could see him being a guy that has 400, 450 yards receiving, finds the end zone 4 or 5 times. And I think you'd be pretty satisfied with that if you are the Tar Heels. All right, number 3 on your list, what you got?
Yeah, I wrote down offensive lineman Christo Kelly. We still have to wait and see because of what injury did to him last year. If he can really play at this level over a 12 game sample size, I think that's going to happen. And I think the leadership he's going to bring to this room, to this locker room, I think is going to be the most invaluable piece. Jordan Shipp was pretty passionate back at ACC kickoff, with defending Belichick for all the nonsense. Christo Kelly, I think, kind of echoes the message that Belichick is trying to instill. And I think he'll be the type of guy, if 5 years from now we're still talking about the Bill Belichick era, or maybe the Bill Belichick era has moved on, but we look back on it positively, we'll be talking about Christo Kelly being a big reason why, because he was the culture, one of the culture guys in the locker room that survived through a tumultuous first season, came back, stuck with it. I think his body's in a little bit better shape. I think he's ready to be the anchor of that interior of the offensive line. And I think that he'll be one of those guys that we can talk about in a positive way. And so I don't think he's going to necessarily be an all ACC caliber center. Those types of guys usually go to the teams that are playing in conference championship games. And I don't think that's going to be something Carolina is doing this year. But I think if he stays healthy, you'll see an offensive line that's better at the point of attack, that's doing a much better job blowing guys off the ball at the line of scrimmage, creating lanes in the run game for Benjamin Hall, Damon June, so on and so forth. And so I think Christo Kelly, if he stays healthy, is poised to have a big season in Carolina Blue.
Yeah, I went with a different offensive lineman. I do like what Christo Kelly could potentially bring to the table, but I do have some questions about him. Of course, as we mentioned, going into last year, and I think still exists because he only played 16 snaps a year ago. What is he going to look like coming up from the FCS level? I have a little bit more confidence in Aiden Banfield, and I think that's going to be a guy that's really going to break out this season, because I think you could say he was a starter. Wouldn't he already be sort of a breakout player for Carolina? I guess you could say that. But you look back, he was kind of the least talked about guy on that offensive line as a true freshman. He had some really solid moments. I mean, go back, I was thoroughly impressed by what you saw from him as a true freshman in his first career game in the season opener against Minnesota. But I think this is his year where he's going to become the anchor of that offensive line. I think he's a guy that could end up being an all ACC caliber offensive lineman for Carolina. And I don't know if anybody else on this offensive line is going to necessarily be that. I think there's other guys that maybe you could see at their best becoming all ACC honorable mentions. This is a guy that I think could land on one of the all ACC teams. Now, it might be third team, but still, you could see him there at the end of the season. You look back at last year, he wasn't great in the 2 games that they played against power conference competition, wasn't great against TCU. I think he's going to be very motivated to bounce back from that in the first game of the season. He wasn't great in that game against Central Florida, but you do wonder, did he come into that game already a little banged up and then eventually suffers the season-ending injury that keeps him out for the remainder of the season? I just think everything that we've heard about him is that he has made some significant progress. He didn't miss any time back in the spring recovering from that injury. So even though it was a serious lower leg injury that he suffered in the middle of last season, he was back in at full strength in the spring. And I think that's going to be really helpful. It's probably helped him to grow a little bit from the last time that we saw him as a player. And I think that's really going to translate over for Carolina. He's making the move to right guard. I'll be interested to see if that helps him out a little bit, if he shines there a little bit more than he did maybe at left guard. If I remember correctly, he did play right guard when he was at the high school level, so that might fit him a little bit better. And he's one of the main reasons that I believe that Carolina's offensive line is going to be better than it was a year ago. One of the main reasons that I think Carolina is going to be able to run the ball better than they did a year ago. I'm expecting big things from Aiden Banfield, one of those guys that's going to be talked about as a reliable leader for Carolina along the offensive line this season, someone that's going to be able to maul some of those interior defensive linemen for opposing teams. And I think if you're looking for a guy to watch in that season opener, for someone that could potentially stand out along that offensive line, I think Aiden Banfield is that guy that you should be looking for in that game. When you go to the fourth guy that you have on your list, you go over to the defensive side, and one of those guys that was battling for his starting job at the start of fall camp, but quickly took over that starting job and looks like he's going to head into the opener playing significant reps.
Yep, that leads us to the Penn State transfer, Jalen Harvey, a guy that, spent 2 years in Happy Valley, played in 11 games last year for the Nittany Lions, recorded 8 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and a sack. I don't want to say that the entire growth of Carolina's defense hinges upon them finding an opposite pass rusher opposite Melkart Abijadi, but it does feel like if they want to take that next step from, I would list them as a solid defense a year ago, to be, let's say, becoming very, very good. I don't want to throw out elite. I think they're probably another year away from being an elite defensive unit. But if they want to take that next step, they got to have they got to have 2 pass rushers, because until they find 2, Melkart's going to be double teamed virtually every time he takes the field. And look, he's a good enough player. He'll be able to still impact the game. I think he'll be able to fight through double teams. He talked about getting stronger this offseason. I think he's added a pass rush move or 2 to his arsenal. Melkart will still be an impactful pass rusher for Carolina. But if you can't make the defense respect the other guy coming off the edge, it makes it easier to scheme about your way of attacking Carolina's defense. With that being said, I think Jalen Harvey, I think he's got everything you want in terms of frame. I think it's just really it coming all together and applying his skill set and then allowing it to translate onto the football field. And I think he's poised to be an edge center for Carolina, help them, force the run back inside, where you want your big defensive linemen, you want your linebackers running downhill, filling those gaps. But I think you're talking about a guy that, if he can give Carolina 6+ sacks, I think that would be just a game changer, because at that point you cannot disrespect him. And I think that's something that he's capable of doing. I think what's going to be the key is, what does the production look like? Is it consistent production, game in, game out? Or is this like one of our former Fox brothers, where you look at a guy that would have great stats, but when you really dug into those stats, it would be a handful of games where a lot of that sack production maybe showed up in. Something Melkart's got to work on as well. But I think internally they know the importance of developing that second pass rusher, having that guy that they can count on starting here week 0 against TCU. Identify that guy as Jalen Harvey. I think he's poised to break out among that Carolina defensive front.
Yeah, I go over to the offensive side of the ball, stick on that side. And believe it or not, I didn't even realize this when I went through it, but I have 4 guys on the offensive side of the ball to start this list. Now, there's one that you have on your list that I went back afterwards and I said, man, I probably should have put him down. Honestly, just forgot about him because I think he's a guy that it felt like had a bigger role than he did last year on that defense. But I'll stick on the offensive side of the ball. I'll go Trek Kekauna, who I really think is poised to break out this season after, a career at Wisconsin that was just okay. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to how much do you read into what he did at Wisconsin, remember that Wisconsin's passing offense is historically one of the worst in college football. Their leading passer all time, the most yards that they've ever had a player throw for is a little over 7,000. They are a team that is built to run the football, throw when they absolutely have to, and that's pretty much it. And if you look back at the last handful of years, they aren't even really that successful in doing that under Luke Fickell. So I think with him, he was more of a product of his environment. I think there's a little bit more talent there. I think he should get the football a little bit more in Bobby Petrino's offense, especially if you get better quarterback play. And like I said, out of the gate, you're going to be dealing with a quarterback that probably is going to be a lot like some of the previous quarterbacks that you played with. Now, I still believe that Billy Edwards is probably going to get him the football at a much higher rate than some of the guys that he played with at Wisconsin outside of him. Remember, he played with Billy to begin last season, so there is that camaraderie that they have. He was a guy that was in fall camp with him last year before Billy, of course, would go into the season, start the year for Wisconsin, but get injured in that first game of the season and then not really play the rest of the year. So he does have that history with him. He's continued to build on that here during the spring, into the summer, and now, of course, here in the fall. And so I believe that he's going to be one of those guys that's going to be relied on heavily for Carolina out of the gate. The other thing that I really like about him that Carolina lacked last season in the slot is a guy that can make plays after the catch. And that is going to be one of the biggest keys for Carolina in the opening portion of the season. With Billy Edwards as your quarterback, you need guys that are going to be able to make plays with the ball in their hand. This can't be catch the ball, go down to the ground. Not like last year where it felt like Carolina didn't have the athletes to be able to make plays like that. With Trek, it feels like there is much more confidence that he's going to be able to do some things after the catch. I think one thing that you really like to see is that he's a guy that's emerging on special teams as a guy that is probably going to factor in at punt returner. In order to factor in at punt returner, you need a guy that's got some speed. You need a guy that's a little shifty and can make guys miss. And I think that's what you're going to see from Trek to begin the season. I think he's going to be relied on pretty heavily in the first game. I think that'll extend out into the first half of the season. And so I expect him to have a pretty good year for Carolina. Now, towards the back end of the season, once they start getting some guys that can maybe air out the football a little bit more, like I think they will in there at quarterback, you never know what it ultimately ends up becoming. There's also a true freshman in CJ Sadler that is, breathing down his neck and at some point is going to want to get himself on the field and may have just too much talent not to put on the field. But I believe that Trek is going to still at that time have a pretty significant role for Carolina. And I'm expecting a breakout season for him this year. You finish up on the defensive side of the ball. We both finish up on the defensive side of the ball. With safeties, you go with a guy that probably is on a lot of people's list for this upcoming season, and rightfully so.
I took the safe route, and that's Greg Smith III, the Florida transfer who played for Carolina last year, and registered 25 total tackles, with his best game coming in that Clemson loss where he had 4 solo tackles, had an interception in the win against Charlotte in the first win under Bill Belichick. But I think this is a guy that's poised for more. Where I think his size is a gift. That's 6'4", 215. He's big. I think he can cover a lot of ground. I love his ability to be in the box, be an impactful run defender for Bill Belichick and this defense. And I think he is. I think he's going to be really, really good. And I think, our buddy here, Tar Pit 9, commenting about his PFF grade. You look at those people and how much value you want to put into them. I don't know. Hopefully you want to put a lot of them because I want to bring a cool feature to what we want to do whenever we recap the games this year. But the PFF grade was really, really good. I think the more he's on the field, the better he's going to be. And I think he'll be a guy that gets better with every rep, every series, every game, so on and so forth, where I think he's going to be a real impactful defender for Carolina. I don't know if you ever want your safeties to be among your top tacklers, but I think he has the ability to be that because I think he is sure-handed. And as I mentioned, they can basically put him down in the box as an extra linebacker at times with just how big and physical he is to help in the run game. I think he's really poised to take a massive step forward and be really someone we're talking about in 2027 as a face of the defense, a face of the program, and a guy that maybe will garner some all ACC conversation this time next year. So I'm really excited to see what Greg Smith does. But I think there maybe isn't a player as much as anybody defensively that is poised to build off what he did last year, more so than Greg Smith. And I'm excited to see what that looks like starting this weekend.
Yeah, he was a miss for me. No doubt about it. When I went back and looked at the group of guys that you had, I said, man, that was one that I definitely should have put on there. It's weird because I guess I sort of forgot about him because I remember back in the offseason when Carolina looked like they were going to lose him to the portal, and then they ended up bringing him back. It was such a huge story. And it just felt like last year he was so impactful to the point where it was almost a breakout year. But the problem is that he didn't really play all that much for Carolina. He was a guy that was used really on third downs as sort of a hybrid linebacker. So that's a great call. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to have a huge season for Carolina. I mean, everything that we've heard about him is that he is shining. He looks the part. He looks like a guy that's going to stand out. And Carolina, whether you look at him or Jaden Patterson, Carolina's got star potential at every single level this season. And that was something that I don't know if you said that about the team last year. I went with the guy that's probably going to be beside him in the opener. I haven't heard anything that would tell me any different based off of what we saw towards the last couple of practices that the media was able to view. I'm going to go with Peyton Waters. I think based off of what we saw last year, there are some flashes that he is apparently built on that really have me excited about what he can be this season for Carolina. And I don't think it's any small feat that he has beat out Ade Willie, a guy that Carolina values for the experience that he brings, the versatility that he brings. Coleman Bryson, who at times late last year, Carolina relied on him to play significant snaps. I think it is very, very noticeable that he has overtaken both of those guys on the depth chart and is now projected to be Carolina's starter. And so, again, I liked what I saw from him in the limited snaps that he played last year. I think he's a guy that is going to be able to cover that back end as well as just about anybody that we have seen over the last couple of years for Carolina. I mean, yeah, there were moments last year where Gavin Gibson looked good. There were moments where Gavin Gibson really struggled. I think Peyton Waters is a guy that has a chance to maybe be a little bit more consistent back there. He was a guy that was brought in for a reason because he had spent a year in Steve Belichick's system. He had last year and now this offseason in that same system. So this is his third year in that system. And maybe he's a guy that's going to be affected by Steve Belichick not being out there. I would like to believe that that isn't the case, especially with the way that he has been shining towards the end of fall practice when you didn't have Steve Belichick on the field. I think that's very telling that he's still a guy that's standing out for Carolina in those circumstances. And so I think he's going to be pretty good about coming into this year. I also, I always like taking a little bit of a risk when it comes to one of these guys on this list go a little bit outside the box. This isn't nearly as outside the box as some of the other guys that I've gone with, but I think, yeah, there probably are some people that still have some questions about him going into this season. I feel pretty bullish on him, though, with the strides that he's made, being someone that is going to have a really strong season for Carolina back there in the secondary, and I think it will show up in that first game of the season against TCU when he's out there a pretty significant amount. All right, now let's get to our bold predictions for the season. Again, send in your breakout players, send in your bold predictions for this upcoming season. I'll let you lead off here again. We've got 5 of them each. So yeah, go ahead with yours. I think yours maybe a little bit bolder than mine. But still, I'll let you go first.
There's no doubt about that. My predictions are definitely more bolder as we move along. But with me, you get the bold, you get the bald, but you don't get the beautiful. I do not get the beautiful out of the 3 B's there. My first bold prediction, still watch whenever we do the record prediction, and still watch whenever we officially pick preview TCU later on in the week. It's a busy week of podcasts. You want to make sure you're subscribed on the Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter pages. I think Carolina wins the opener. And the reason why I think it's bold is because there's not a whole lot of optimism that Carolina wins this game. From a local perspective, from a national perspective, from a betting perspective, everywhere you turn, it's TCU this, TCU that, or Carolina sucks, Bill Belichick sucks, whatever it is. I think this is a roster that's in a better position, talent-wise, from going into this game than it was a year ago. I think the depth is better than it was a year ago. And I don't know how good TCU is. I knew how good TCU was last year. I know how good TCU was capable of being. I heard my guy Josh Payton the other day talking about like a scenario where TCU goes 11-1 this year because of how easy their schedule is in the Big 12. I don't see all the stars coming together for them this year like they did when they had their magical run. You know, under Sonny Dykes what they're going to be. They're going to be an offensive-driven team. They want to be explosive on the offensive side of the ball. But I think if Carolina can win the line of scrimmage and shorten this game, and I'm talking, let's make this NFL style. You know, college football, you get about 12, 14 possessions in a game. I think best-case scenario, Carolina makes this an 8 to 10 possession game. I think there's a path for Carolina getting a win on Saturday. And so my first bold prediction is to get a win overseas against TCU. We know how infrequent season opening wins have been against power conference competition. I think Carolina, like last year in the first game of the year, they're in a national TV spotlight. Everybody and their mother will be watching this team play on Saturday at noon. They put together a better showing they did last year on Labor Day night against TCU. They shocked the Horned Frogs in Ireland.
I would love it. I mean, there would be nothing more that I would love than for Carolina to do that. I couldn't put it in my bold predictions here. I thought about it. I thought about even specific wins. I thought about putting them in here. I do have one that's based around wins a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, the fact that is where you're starting out, I think should show people just how bold some of these predictions are for this season. I went with the secondary, and I thought, you know, this was the perfect way to talk about Greg Smith a little bit more because I didn't put him in my breakout players. But I think that Carolina will have 2 members of their secondary finish with second-team All-ACC honors this year. That's a pretty far cry from where they were last season. And so, you know, when I look at Jaden Patterson, I love everything that I've seen from him so far. He's one of those guys that now being counted on as Carolina's top corner, going to play, more snaps than he did a year ago. Is it going to translate? For one, I have absolutely no concern that it's not going to translate. I don't think there's any universe that it doesn't, based off of what we saw from him last year. I think he's just too consistent in coverage. Feels like everything. We haven't heard a lot about him in preseason camp. I think that's a good thing. I think the fact that he is a guy that is just doing what he needs to do, they're not talking about, hey, he's really struggling. I think that's a good sign for Carolina. And I don't think he's going to be picked on really that much this season. Part of it is because of how good of a player he is. The other part of it is that they will probably be picking on the other side of Carolina's defensive back or cornerback tandem this upcoming season. So I'll be really interested to see. I think he's going to have a phenomenal season. He'll be matched up against some of the best in college football this year at that boundary corner position. You'll see it throughout different times in the season where he'll be tested with some of the better guys that this conference has to offer, as well as some of the best that college football has to offer as Carolina goes throughout their schedule. I think he's going to put together a fantastic year. And then, I'm really feeling what we're seeing from Greg Smith. I think he is a guy that can really affect the game in the box when it comes to the run. I think we saw that last year. We saw how good of a tackler he was, how impactful he was in certain third down situations there. And then you saw what he was able to do last year in coverage. I think, it's great for a linebacker to be able to do it. There's questions as to whether or not he'll be able to do it at the level that a safety needs to do it. I feel pretty good, especially with everything that I've heard about him, that he's going to be able to take that next step, adjust to that move back to the safety spot. And also, it's not going to hurt him by any stretch of the imagination that he has some of the best height that you're going to see out of a safety at 6'4". I think that's going to play in very well for him to be able to make plays on the football throughout the season. So I'm expecting big things from both of those guys this season, and I think they're going to earn second team All ACC honors. For you, you go into the backfield for your next bold take for this upcoming season, the offensive backfield.
Yeah, we've talked about, Benjamin Hall was a breakout player for me and for you going into the upcoming year. We know Damon June is going to, I think, have a larger, a much more consistent presence in that backfield. I don't think we'll have to come, recap a game and talk about why he only carried the ball 6 times. I think he'll get the ball, 12, 15 times a game. With that, I think Carolina doesn't produce a 1,000-yard rusher, but I wrote they produce 2 800-yard backs. And look, I'd love to say that they turn into what, Michael Carter and Javonte Williams were when that backfield was arguably statistically the best backfield in all college football back during the COVID year. I'm not going to ever probably project something like that with how great those two players were that individual season. But I think Carolina's identity is going to be a run-first football team that really builds their passing game off their ability to run it. You've got 2 backs with 2 different skill sets that I think you can utilize them in different ways. I think you'll make it hard to kind of prepare to stop both of these guys. And we've seen this Petrino offense at different points in time. When he has backs, he's not afraid to utilize them. He's not afraid to feature them. So while I don't think either one cracks the 1,000-yard mark, I do think Carolina, that backfield produces 2 800-yard plus backs. And if that's the case, this run game will be productive week in, week out.
Yeah, I went with something, I guess, similar. Maybe you do end up having 2 800-yard backs in my circumstance as well. I think with where Carolina's run game was at a year ago, I think something that would be a safer bold prediction, at least for myself, is to have the Tar Heels finish top 5 in the ACC in rushing this season. A lot of this is going to go into the fact that they will be determined rather by the fact that you are going to have a group that blocks better, if you have an offensive line that blocks better, if you got a tight end room that blocks better, then you have a chance to do this. Because I think the talent is there in the backfield. We have talked about how much we like Benjamin Hall going into this season, how good we feel about him based on some of the things that we're hearing coming out of camp, and that is being reported coming out of camp. And then you've got Damon June, who I think everybody, it sort of feels pretty good about going into this season. I know that, him being second on the depth chart, maybe some people are wondering what exactly is going on there. Has he taken a little bit of a step back? I think that's more of a credit to Benjamin Hall and what he's put in the offseason and getting himself better, rather than Damon June being a guy that's taken a step back. I think Damon June's going to be fine. I hope that, there's a little bit more explosiveness there than there was a year ago. Maybe he's a guy that is able to get to the edge a little bit easier than he was a year ago and really create some plays out there, where last year everything seemed to be in between the tackles for both him and Benjamin Hall. I think there will be more of a focus to get to the edge for those guys this season with better blocking. And so I do think you'll be able to create some of those bigger chunk plays in the running game that you weren't able to last season. And it's going to be important, especially early on in the season, when you might not be able to create those chunk plays through the air. But I think Carolina will be able to do it. I really like both of those guys. And I'm also liking what I'm hearing about Jalen McGill, man. He's a guy that really is starting to trend in the right direction. I think it's very telling that they put him up there to speak to the media. I think that certainly shows that he's been putting in the work that this staff wants to see from him. And for him, I think when you look at what his role could be, if those explosive plays aren't going to come from a guy like Benjamin Hall, a guy like Damon June, if they're going to continue to be guys that just run inside the tackles and they can't necessarily create the big plays there, then Jalen McGill is going to be that guy that's got a little bit of speed, can get to the edge, also incredibly strong himself. You look back at some of the numbers that he had coming out of high school, some of the things that he did at the high school level, he is insanely strong in that manner. But I do think there's a little bit more explosiveness to his game that he brings in the other two guys. That could be the role that he fits into this season. And I think Carolina could be safely inside that top 5 in rushing this season, which is something that I think they'll probably have to do if they're going to be a team that makes a bowl game this upcoming year. For you, this is where you really start to get pretty bold here, is at number 3 and beyond. And I got to tell you, if some of this stuff comes true, I'm really liking it.
Yeah, if some of this stuff comes true, we'll have a lot more fun this year doing the pod than we've had the past couple of years. Whenever you have a new head coach and he's trying to build his program, the first thing that you want to find on the field is that signature win, that signature moment. Every program has it under their different, we had them under Butch Davis to Larry Fedora, Mac Brown. We don't have that yet under Bill Belichick. And we had chances last year to maybe have those signature moments with the Virginia game at home, the Duke game. There were chances for Carolina to have signature wins to really get this thing going in the right direction. I think they get one this year in the form of getting a home win over Notre Dame, over Miami, or Louisville. Let me preface this by saying I do think the more likely of the two or the 3 is Louisville, because I'm really high on Miami. I'm really high on Notre Dame. That is my national championship game going into the year. But we have seen, Miami last year lost back-to-back games under Cristobal. We've seen Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. They've had letdown moments. They've lost games they should not have. Louisville, is a team that's, I think, trendy top 3, top 4 entering the year. If they catch lightning in a bottle with how good that run game is, could they maybe sneak into the ACC title game? I think that would qualify as a really signature win for Bill Belichick and for Carolina football in year 2. So I think they get one of those three at home. But I'll admit the more likely of them is that home game against Louisville. I think that game takes place in November, but regardless, a win over either three of those programs, I do think would suggest progress and that this thing, despite all the detractors and all the naysayers, is actually heading in the right direction.
Yeah. That ties into probably the most bold take that I have later on is I think one of those games could be in there for Carolina to potentially win. Notre Dame's really tough, man. That early in the season, I think that's one. If you could get that, I think that would be just absolutely massive. That's when you start talking about Kenan Stadium starting to be pretty full the rest of the year, because there would be a massive amount of excitement around Carolina at that point. Even Miami. And the thing about Miami is you could say that it's insane that there's no way that Carolina is going to beat them. I don't think Carolina is going to beat them, but that's one team. Carolina has had their number since Larry Fedora took over as the head coach at Carolina. It's one of those weird things, and I get it. They haven't had a team that's as good as this team, and maybe that's ultimately what determines the direction of how that game ends up going. But it is something that is going to be there, something that might be on the mind of Miami, and that could be a game that Miami overlooks coming into that one. I think the more realistic one, as you said, is probably Louisville. But man, if you could just get one of those, I think, yeah, that speaks volumes to things are heading in the right direction. And there is at least hope that this could still work out under Bill Belichick. My third bold prediction, and I think this is fairly bold for Carolina, is that they end up leading the conference in sacks. I mean, you look at some of the other teams in this conference. I mean, Louisville has one of the better edge rushers in Cleb Lubin. Miami is just stacked all across the board in terms of the guys that they have. Damon Wilson, who they picked up from Missouri. Really like Mitch Lightfoot and what you saw from him last year. Now he's going to be able to thrive there with no Akeem Mesidor, no Ruben Bain. He's one of those guys that's going to be stepping up. And they've got a few other young guys that they really like there as well, including some of their guys on the interior of their defensive line. I think it could be one of those sort of misleading stats for Carolina maybe at the end of the year, where it could be a lot of those sacks end up coming in bunches for the Tar Heels. But as you mentioned earlier, I think Jalen Harvey could be a guy that gets 6-7 sacks, somewhere in that range, similar to what we saw from Tyler Thompson a year ago, where Tyler Thompson in the middle portion of the season really bursted out against some really solid defense or against some less than stellar, I should say, offensive lines. Now the question is, will they be able to do it against some of the better offensive lines that they're going to be playing? Because they're going to be playing better offensive lines this year than they played a year ago. But if you can get a more consistent Milcard Abujaneh, if you can get some of those moments from Jalen Harvey, remember that you do have Donovan Hoylett, who finished with 9 sacks a year ago at Richmond. Now it is the FCS level, but can you get 5 or 6 for yourself this year? And then maybe there are a few other guys that chip in. Maybe you get some interior pressure from guys like Isaiah Johnson and Leroy Jackson. Maybe there are some other guys that emerge there, like Nico Maggio or Trey Giddens, who have climbed the depth chart and are now right behind those guys at the defensive tackle spots. And maybe there is a guy at edge rusher like Calvin Thomas who could break out as the season goes along. I think Carolina has an opportunity to do this. It's going to take all the right breaks or all the things going right for Carolina at the right time. I think, especially in that middle portion of the season and then towards the end of the year is where Carolina is really going to have to get into form if they're going to accomplish this. But I think with Milcart there, with some of the talent that Carolina has outside of him at the edge rusher position, and what I expect to be a better pass rush group at the defensive tackle position this year, I do think that it is possible that Carolina leads the ACC in sacks this upcoming season.
Yeah, my fourth bold prediction is a defensive one, and I think if Carolina is a top ACC sack defense, I think this could really funnel where I'm going. I think Carolina's defense is going to take that next step where I think they're going to be really, really good, mainly because I think they got to be to win games. I think Carolina's got to win games, 24-21, 21-17, maybe 28-24 is about the most they could give up on a week in, week out basis. I think Carolina fields a top 25 scoring defense in 2026. And I think if Carolina does that, then I think you're talking about special seasons from your known commodities. That also probably means that Jalen Harvey hits, that Peyton Seelman, Derek McDonald really solidified the front seven. You know what you got in the back end with Greg Smith, Jaden Patterson. But this is, you mentioned you got playmakers at all three levels defensively. Well, I think this would be that it all blossoms and it all really comes together in a big way for Bill Belichick. Hopefully his son can be back to be a part of this. But regardless, I think some of it will be dictated on, can Carolina be a ball control offense and limit possessions? I do think they're the way they could quote unquote game the system. And depending on how you look at defensive stats, points per game allowed, I think they do matter, but there are certain analytics that people value more often, like points per possession, stuff like that. I still think if Carolina's got a top 25 scoring defense, it's gonna suggest that they really took a step forward. So look, they've got some high octane offense. They've got to slow down. I mentioned, the Louisvilles, the Notre Dames, the Miamis of the world. Those are offense that could come into your backyard and put up a lot of points and a lot of yards. But if Carolina can slow them down, I think they could be a top 25 unit nationally in terms of points per game allowed. And we haven't talked about that in quite some time in and around Chapel Hill.
Yeah, I don't even remember the last time that Carolina would have been in that range. I mean, 24.5 points per game last season was their best mark since 2019. And remember, that was a bend, don't break type of defense. It felt like Carolina was much more consistent last year, and the yards per game really showed that. I mean, Carolina allowed 336.9 yards per game last year. I said this at the time when Steve Belichick, it was announced that he wouldn't be on the sideline for Carolina for the foreseeable future. That was the best mark for Carolina since 2009. Now, this step would be very significant because in order for that to happen, if you go back to last year, basically the 25th ranked team in the country in terms of points per game allowed defensively was East Carolina at 20.1. So basically, Carolina would have to be a team that allows less than 20 points per game to finish inside of the top 25. That would be absolutely amazing with some of the offenses that you're going to be facing throughout the year. That would be huge. So that is incredibly bold. I love it. I hope you are right. I have been here before with Carolina's defense. I believe there was a one time. I don't remember if it was Gene Chizik as the defensive coordinator or if it was Jay Bateman as the defensive coordinator, where I said I believe they would finish with a top 25 overall defense in the country. That didn't necessarily work out, so maybe I'm being too afraid, but that would certainly be an amazing feat for Carolina on the defensive side of the ball. My bold prediction, my fourth bold prediction that I have is I think there will be a quarterback change in the middle of the season. I think that Carolina at one point during this season, they are going to get to a point based off of, some of the opponents that they've played. They will have a record that will get you to the point of thinking, can we finish the season a little bit better with a change at starting quarterback. Maybe, Billy Edwards has sort of flattened out, plateaued. You feel like, yeah, this is about the best that we can get out of him is what we've gotten so far, and we need something just a little bit better. I think that's what's going to happen, and I think that even though they won't have a perfect spot to do it outside of those 2 bye weeks early in the season, I think that the game against Syracuse could be where they make that change. And I'm going to say, based off of some of the stuff that we've heard with him being fully healthy now, based on him being the most purely talented quarterback in the room, I think Travis Burgess is going to be the guy that comes in and takes over for Billy Edwards Jr. in that game against Syracuse. I think they skip right over Miles O'Neill because I think Travis Burgess is just going to be that good. And I think he's the guy that takes Carolina down the stretch of the season. I don't know how bold that is. I think there are some people that really believe in Burgess, really think that he is the future of what Carolina does. And to me, I think, if Carolina, if he is going to be the guy that they're going to turn to at some point, why not let it be this year? If they get to that 6th game of the season, I think that's plenty of time to let Travis adjust to the college level, settle himself in. And I think by that time, he will have done enough to overtake Miles and be the guy that Carolina ultimately turns to in that scenario. I don't know if it's going to be 100% smooth for him when he gets in there. The one thing that I would caution people on is if he does take over midseason, do not expect him to immediately light it up and be a guy that's going to look like Sam Howell, that's going to look like Drake May when they took over the starting quarterback jobs. But I have really high hopes for what he could be in the future. And I think based off of what we're hearing with how he's looked, according to Inside Carolina, Tar Heel 24/7, when they've talked about him in their podcast, and when you look at some of the sources around the program, I think he certainly has a chance to not only play this season, but start this season for Carolina.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, of all the things you wrote down, I think that's your boldest. No, I'd probably say it's leading the ACC in sacks, but still bold, still what this is supposed to be about, the spirit of what this is to be about. The last thing I wrote down is if it's bold, I don't know. Don't really care. I need this. I need this for my mental. What was that saying that Marshawn Lynch once said? You got to take care of your mental and you got to take care of your chicken. And I think he's talking about chicken in terms of money. I take care of chicken in terms of eating it because I eat chicken just about every single day. If we lose to Duke and State again, my mental is going to be in question. It probably already is, rightfully so. I wouldn't even deny that. But I don't know if I could recap another loss to State. I wish I was exaggerating. I would rather have an enema than have to talk about losing to State again. I'd rather have a root canal than have to talk about losing to State again. I can name another 100 procedures I'd rather have done to my body than to talk about losing to that soulless sack of crap from Raleigh. And then the Duke stuff, it's not even just the fact because we've lost to them. It's just been how painful the last 2 years the losses have been. Where Carolina, 2 years ago blew a 20-0 lead. And then last year they played well enough to win the game. You saw a lot of reasons why Mensah ended up at Miami as a reason why they didn't. He made some plays where you just had to say, that's a hell of a player there. But that doesn't mean I can stomach losing to them, and I don't want to lose to them. So my last bold prediction is that Carolina sweeps their 2 main rivalry games. We reclaim the victory bell, comes back to Chapel Hill. We paint it the better shade of blue, and then more importantly, we end this losing streak to NC State, and we can finally We can finally shut their fan base up. We can finally shut Dave Doran up. And depending on how their season unfolds, he loses the season finale to Carolina. Probably could cost him his job. And what a great, what a good riddance situation that would be if we could beat him and then see his ass get fired and become unemployed. So, don't know how bold those ultimately are, but those are two things I need in my football soul. I think Carolina wins their two big rivalry games this year.
Oh, I mean, I don't know if there would be anything more satisfying that I've seen in life yet than Dave Doran being fired because of Carolina, joining most of their fan base in the unemployment line because of what Carolina did to them. That would be unbelievable. I would feel so much joy. I thought about it. What would I be willing to lose? At this point, I might be willing to lose a limb in order to beat NC State this upcoming season because I'm sick and damn tired of losing to them. I'm over it. And I hope that that's the same mindset that's being preached in the locker room by Bill Belichick, by these players that are on this roster. I don't know if it is. That's been one of the biggest issues that I think I've had with not just Bill Belichick, but it goes back to Mac Brown. It goes back to Larry Fedora, where how much do you honestly hate that team from Raleigh? Because they hate everything about you. They wish you weren't on this planet. But for you at times, we wonder, do you really even hate the team that's on the other side? There are certain guys that do. J.J. Jones certainly showed us that a few years ago, that he hated that team that was on the other side. But we need more moments like that. Not what we saw at the end of that game. We need more moments on the field. We need more moments throughout the season that prove that you care about that game more than anything else. I get it. I'm with you. I really want to beat Duke as well, especially with the heartbreak that you've had the last couple of seasons. If you tell me that Carolina just beat State at the end of the year, but they lose that game to Duke, I'm incredibly satisfied.
Yeah, this now leads us to play a fun game. Josh Pate had Brandon Walker on his podcast, and he asked what he'd be willing to sacrifice to get Mississippi State. He's a big Mississippi State Bulldogs fan.
Yeah.
What it would take to get them to win a national championship. He was willing to sacrifice his mother. He was willing to sacrifice his marriage. Was not willing to go as far as the kids, but was willing to engage in a relationship, a public one with Josh Pate to get them a national championship. So I ask you, are you willing to sacrifice a family member? Are you willing to sacrifice your future kids? And would you be willing to embark on a public relationship with me if it meant a win over NC State?
The latter, probably, because at this point, most people expect that that's going to happen at some point in their lives anyways. Sacrificing a future marriage, man, I really do want that. But there's a pretty good chance that's not going to happen for me anyways. So I'm probably willing to give that up as well at this point. What else was the family member? No, that's a little bit too far. Call me a fake fan or whatever you want to call me at that rate. I'm not sacrificing family members.
I think the bigger question is who is the family member in relation to? And what do you stand to benefit? Like if it's like your second uncle that's like 87 years old, all right, I could probably carve out.
You know what? You're a bad guy, man.
I could probably carve out some time. But like, what if it's like he was going to, he sacrificed his mother, who's just 68, by the way. I don't think I'm in the position sacrificing any of my parents. I live with my grandmother. My mama's 73. She's the most lovely woman in the world. I know what my inheritance is, though. I would probably have to stop and think about it.
Oh, my gosh.
Don't think I'm pulling the trigger.
Oh, my gosh.
But you probably got to think about it.
Boy, so, you know what? This is truly a hallmark moment of this show, because what we have known for years in your time working at WFNZ, we have now had come to these airways. For the longest time, most people probably thought, man, this Josh guy, pretty nice guy. When we all know that's not necessarily the case. The fact that you would even think about it makes you a bad guy.
Well,
It's
look,
horrible person is on the table.
that's what losing to those cow farmers do. I don't like the person that I am after losses to NC State. Like, and it doesn't matter football, basketball, baseball, field hockey. It don't matter the sport, man. I hate losing to them. And so it's Carolina's fault and it's not even the fact that we lose to them. It's that we've been non-competitive, that we just show up and just accept that they're going to bend us over, pull our pants down, take the belt, and they're going to beat them, and they're just going to pound it for 60 minutes. So if that wouldn't have happened,
you couldn't have used a different phrase there. That's
if that would not have happened, would not be willing to put all this stuff on the line. But this is where we are. Beat them. Because you let North Carolina football beat Dave Doran, and then I wake up on that Sunday, 7-8 o'clock, and I get that notification that Dave Doran got fired. And we get the final laugh when it comes to him. Then all the pain and all the heartbreak would be worth it.
I will have to sleep on my back for weeks. It would be we've gone there already. But yes, it would be truly one of the greatest moments of my entire life. You might say that's incredibly sad, but
he's a millionaire. What's it going to hurt him if he's unemployed?
It would, yeah. He ain't going to be hurting. And he's probably close to retirement anyways, so it is what it is. But there's also people that, in life, you just don't feel bad if they end up getting fired. He would be one of those ones that would be in that category for me. But what do you expect? I'm a Tar Heel fan. Of course, I'm not going to like him. That was heightened by what he said a few years ago, where he made his feelings known about people that are associated with the university. So that's perfectly fine. Yes, I think we would all rejoice if that ended up happening. I'm in lockstep with you on the fact that they will beat NC State, because first of all, I have said this many times on this podcast, and it will continue to be the truth until the day that this podcast meets its death, which will probably be the day that one of us meets our death, which, with our diets could be anytime soon. But Carolina will beat State at the end of the season. Carolina will also beat a couple of other teams towards the end of the season. I think there's a 4-game stretch at the end of the season that has some winnable games for Carolina. Now, how winnable, I think it depends on what you feel about certain teams for this upcoming season. There are some expectations for both Louisville and Virginia. But here's the thing. If Carolina is going to have any chance of building momentum at the end of the year, which they're going to have to do if they're going to keep this experiment going, they have to go on the road and beat UConn. And here's the thing. I like their head coach hire. I think Jason Candle did some really good things at Toledo. Jason Candle is not Jim Mora Jr. Jim Mora Jr. did some excellent things there. It could take him a little bit of time. Maybe he gets to that point at some point in his career. I think this year should be a year that Carolina should be able to go up there and beat them if you're going to build momentum at the end of the year. So I think Carolina wins that game. I haven't decided which one of these two teams I think Carolina beats, but I think the Louisville game is winnable for Carolina in the fact that I think Louisville at that point, depending on where they're at as a team, could certainly be overlooking that game. And that could be advantageous to Carolina at home. We saw that almost happen last year with Virginia. And speaking of Virginia, That's another team that I could see Carolina beating at the end of the year. Just depends on where they're at in their season. Is Bo Pribula really that guy, or does that quarterback room turn into a mess? They sort of fall back to earth after what they did a year ago. If they do, I think Carolina's going to remember what happened last year, how close they were. There's going to be some motivation going into that game to, find a way to flip that result from last season. And I think Carolina could end up finding a way to win that game. I think Carolina wins 3 out of 4 down the stretch of the season behind true freshman quarterback Travis Burgess. That keeps Bill Belichick and his staff around for next season. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's up to you. But I do think that you will be feeling much better about the possibilities of what Carolina can be in 2027 because they will for sure have their starting quarterback going into next year. So that's our bold predictions for this upcoming season. Go back, listen to, if you're just joining us, listen to our breakout players for this upcoming season. Give us some of your takes in those areas. I did want to shout out Tarpit9, who's been with us the entire time, our guy who is with us for every live edition of the podcast. I got to scroll back. No, I remember it. I'm trying to find the one where he actually put it in here, but I can't find it. He was talking about Derek McDonald being one of his breakout players this season. I could definitely see that. A guy that really got a second chance at Carolina after suffering the injury last season, probably thought that his career might be over. Wasn't a starter to begin with last season at Syracuse. And so he probably thought that this was probably going to be the end of his career. He gets another chance at Carolina. He could certainly be a guy that I could see breaking out this year. Him or if you think that Peyton Seelman is a guy that's a candidate for that, I don't know. We had 120 tackles last year, which was top 10 in the entire sport a year ago. So maybe you don't consider him someone that could be a breakout candidate. I think he could because he's coming from an FCS school. I think either one of those guys we could see being breakout stars for Carolina this upcoming season. So make sure you, those of you that are going back and watching this, make sure you send us some of your breakout players in the comments, some of your bold predictions in the comments. And hey, if you want to get in, what would you give up for a win over NC State? If it is a family member, let us know. We're going to judge you heavily. I'll judge you heavily, but it is what it is. Throw those down there in the comments section for us, guys. We had a ton of fun tonight, and we appreciate all of you guys that are with us. Also, head over to the website, heeltoughblog.com. Plenty of great content that's going to be going up here this week, getting you ready for the season as well as that first game against TCU. When it comes to the podcast side of things, we're going to have plenty of great stuff for you on that front as well. We are venturing to potentially get Bryn Renner on sometime this week. I did want to close the show by also saying congratulations to him and his wife. They got married over the weekend, I believe at Greenbrier up there in West Virginia. If not, then it's an extremely beautiful golf course that they got married at. So congratulations to them. I saw some comments coming from our guy Tarpit9 that says that Bren very high on Travis Burgess. So we're going to get him on here sometime soon to talk about all of these different storylines with the Tar Heels. It's just a matter of whether we can make this work. I mean, he is a little bit busy probably this week getting prepared for the season opener while being a newly married man. So we'll see what we can do on that front. But for sure, we are going to have our 2026 record prediction podcast that we're going to be doing for you guys. That'll probably be on Wednesday. I think we'll probably give this one a night to sort of marinate. And then we'll be back on Wednesday to give you that. And then Thursday, we will go in depth on the game against TCU. We'll tell you all about the Horned Frogs, tell you all about the Tar Heels, give you our keys to the game, and then, of course, pick the game for you to get you ready for that season opener. The article on the opener will probably be out for you guys on Friday, but we'll make sure we have it out in a timely manner so that you can read up on TCU and Carolina and get yourself prepared for that matchup. So plenty of great stuff on the football side of things to carry you through these through this week and into the season opener on Saturday. And then, of course, after the game is over, I'll be there with the takeaways. We'll be back to do the podcast probably on Monday of next week to break down everything that happens from a Carolina standpoint. And then after that, we'll be doing it just about every single week. Even during the bye weeks, we'll be with you, but every single week we'll have you guys prepared for the upcoming game and then recap the upcoming game for you, or recap that game the previous Monday. So make sure you're sticking around for all of that. But for now, I want to thank you guys for watching and listening to this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. And as always, go Tar